Hello again, Register audience. Let me take you back to 1996, the year of Pokemon, the year of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls doing their last dance. Tickle Me Elmo. I'm saying it's the year of Tickle Me Elmo. I'm not asking Elmo to tickle me. And also the year that Microsoft created perhaps its most wonderful invention, the PST file, where you bundle together all your Outlook messages. 1990s email, if those PST files could talk. Well, now they still exist. Many of you are probably PST off with all the PST files in your organization. What can we do about that? Well, that's what we're going to find out today. And who is going to help us find out about it? Mike Weaver from Quadratech. Mike, who probably you weren't even born in 1996.
I was very much born or alive at that point, but certainly very early in my IT career at that point.
I was going to say you weren't aware that you would be doing one day. You would be doing a Regcast about this, Mike. We've had you on before, but for those of you who are meeting you for the first time, tell us, what are you doing at Quadratech?
Absolutely. So I'm one of the product owners here at Quadratech, overseeing our PST migration project, but also our tenant-to-tenant migration product. And then I work closely as well with our other product team on our Office 365 management solutions for managing multiple tenants or complex single tenant scenarios as well.
Now, this PST migration, this is something that Quadratech's doing a lot of, is it?
This is something that we specialized in for quite a while when people first started getting email archive solutions, so shifting PSTs into those. And the really as of late, really in the last few years, but more so in the last year or so, a huge push in trying to get rid of these files that have not aged as well as other things from the 90s as we get ready to move them into modern technology.
Now, you're live today, which means questions. Please, let's have questions if you've got questions. I imagine that those of you who are listening in today are listening in because you are thinking about this. This is on your agenda. We'll be telling you why it's on your agenda and why it should be quite well up your agenda later on. So you've probably got some practical thoughts in your head, some practical worries as well. Let us know what they are. Mike can answer any of this. He does this stuff for real. But Mike, when I was asking around about this, there was one question that came up, and that is, this isn't something with like a strict deadline. It's not something where someone's turning off support or it will become, you can limp on with your PST files, can you?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly there's some organizations we talk to every year and to see if it's a year they're going to take on the project. And later we'll talk about some of the options that companies have, and one of them is to continue to limp along. But a lot of organizations are finding right now, particularly with the current pandemic situation, that limping along just isn't really working for that strategy anymore, especially with all the changes coming to 365 with the different protection options for protecting your data. These files tend to get in the way of those strategies.
Yeah, let's not have too many limpers at the register. What are we going to do today? Well, we're going to be talking about why this really is something that demands your attention and you can't kick the can down the road anymore about this. How you do it. There is more than one way to migrate a PST file. And then once you've decided how you're going to do it, how you manage the project. Not simple things, Mike. But first of all, take us back. Give us a little bit of history and tell us why the PST file problem has got to the state that it is today.
Yeah, so let's go back to 1996. So, this is the very first versions of Microsoft Exchange, and the first versions of Microsoft Exchange really set the tone and were life-changing for organizations. We had MS Mail, which is a great product moving into the Exchange world. The challenge is these servers required very, very expensive high-speed disk for the time, and that in turn meant that organizations couldn't give even their CEOs unlimited mailbox sizes. So we had mailbox limits that are smaller than the pictures you take on your cell phone. I mean, we literally had 5 meg or less for a email quota, and organizations had to keep that way, or else you would quickly have a uncontrollable storage footprint. So what Microsoft did to help with this is, at the time, desktop storage was very cheap, and you kind of had all this storage hanging around unused, where at the time the Windows operating system was a gig or less, and people had 30, 40 gig hard drives, particularly into the 2000s when we started to hit that phase. So they created this file format where people could store their mail offline, and it also meant you could put it on a CD, back it up, and move it from one system to the other. And administrative functions for this has been around for quite some time. As we continue to progress, so did Exchange. So the disks got less expensive, and you could, Exchange became more resilient, and Microsoft allowed, were able to give quotas, or organizations in turn were be able to give better quotas. This really meant that PSTs weren't needed, but people were already addicted to them and had all their historical piece. So users continued to use them, but they weren't really needed. As we enter 2017 and 2020, today, Office 365, everyone, even at the lowest SKU, gets a 25 or 50 gig mailbox, and most modern SKUs that people have a endless archive. So server space is not the issue anymore, but these files have been around for so long and deeply, deeply ingrained in our user behavior that getting these files migrated, A, is important, but B, can be quite challenging because of where they came from and all the years of work that have occurred here.
Mm. Now, I know we're going to be going into more detail about this later, but it's a very important question that Adrian just brings up here. And so we want to get it right out there at the start. And he's saying, in migrating from a live mailbox to PST, and then from PST to an online resource, so hosted exchange, is there going to be any message metadata or audit records lost if you do it right?
So a good solution, if you're in that particular situation, that sounds like you're actually moving from one mail system to another. So PSCs have two purposes. One is the end user problem, but one is the administrative problem, where I need to, just like he mentions there, I need to move from a mailbox system, and for some reason I can't migrate using a live tool, which we should talk about because I own a product that does a lot of this, so you can go direct. But for the situation where maybe it's a divestiture, and you need to export data, and you don't really have a trust set up to do a full-on migration, then there are solutions that can keep track of that. And when we talk about the differences later between the free tools and the paid tools, there is some logging there. But for the particular situation that you're referencing to, Adrian, the concern you have is you have to audit the export to the PST, and then you need your import solution to audit as well. For the situation of moving live mailboxes and administrative, it's probably going to go a little out of scope today, unless if it's really a problem in mass for a divestiture, and which point we can probably talk online and talk through what we've handled in that. But you're absolutely right, that can be an audit challenge.
Yeah, that's true. And but one thing that's going to come up today, I don't want to give the game away on this, is you can do things well, and the whole point of doing this properly is to make sure that you don't lose anything along the way, isn't it?
So actually, I think the next slide up, why don't we talk about some of these
Why don't we talk about it?
issues? Amazing. It's the next slide has what we're has a topic. Um, a lot of this, it's kind of what you're talking about, is that ability to track, but it really falls into the two first issues here of data loss, missing files, and e-discovery issues. So we talk about data loss and missing files. These are offline files, so they and they are not particularly mobile. So users typically have these sitting on their desktop somewhere. For organizations that are traditional domain joined, and not really backing up those local workstations, because most of the really critical data is sitting in a network share, that can be a problem. The other challenge is, as these files have built over the years, they're little databases, and they're prone to corruption and issues. And sometimes they have a little bit of corruption and you can repair it, and other times they become unusable. And that in itself creates user behavior where sometimes users will really back them up, very carefully on their own, because they lost a file back in the day,
Mm.
and now you've got tons of copies of it. The other aspect is security. So when you password protect a Office file today, that's actually encrypted in most cases, and in some cases a very strong encryption. Where PST files, that password is just an open password, and it's not encryption. So when a PST is lost, that is a exposed file, and it
Ah.
can be a problem when you're migrating because you need that password to migrate, or you have to tell it's actually an interesting process where the file is password protected because it thinks it's password protected, not because it actually is. So if you modify the file slightly, the file will no longer think it's password protected, and you can access its contents and migrate it very easily. So one item on that, and that's why that's very important.
Hmm.
And then I think we also talked about the PST files being on local devices, and today we talk about lost devices and hardware issues. But the other thing, Tim and I, we were talking about this just at the beginning, is desktop computers that are in offices that are not accessible right now. You can't get to that file either, and that's really becoming a problem we'll go into later.
Hmm. All of this, when you think about it, it is a surprising security problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and on the physical security, it's certainly a challenge. And then, that goes right into the e-discovery challenges. We have to retain our data and make it available. If you look at the regulations, both in Europe, UK, and US, there's been a lot of changes in the requirements for retaining data and producing it. It used to be good enough to have a best effort to provide data. Now we have to have a best effort to protect data.
Hmm.
And PST files kind of break that those changes that have happened since 2015, and the push as it continues for more of these regulations that come out.
Hmm.
And where these files are so difficult to centralize, if you to do an e-discovery search, they're really quite difficult, and it can become quite expensive. And it also allows people to, not purposely, but by any means, but to bypass the document retention policies organizations have, because they don't think to go back and open all their backup copies of their PSTs and clear it out, or go into their PST file and clear it out when their mailbox is automatically getting those policies. So this is a way where these policies can be accidentally bypassed, but in the modern times of protecting data, that unfortunately doesn't really hold up all the time.
Hmm. You can see why this is something that people maybe don't want to do much about, and they don't want to touch it. But on the other hand, it is a ticking bomb, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's difficult, and it can be expensive, particularly for organizations of size. And we can talk about how to mitigate that expense, but
Hmm.
and the other thing is users are very connected, and I say this in the nicest way possible, but people are emotionally connected to this data because they have been using it since the 90s.
Yeah.
And every day I came in and I filed away my data in my APST, or my 2015 PST, my 2016 PST, and changing that behavior is a panic, where that's been, your protection of, this is where all my working files are. For a lot of
Hmm.
people, that can be really difficult, and have very high help desk volume, which we can understand.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Should we have a look at what the options are?
Sure thing. And then just the last note is,
Oh,
these aren't
yes, of
really
course.
user friendly. So, and we've talked about this. So in the, they're not available on Outlook Web Access or Office.com because they're locked away somewhere. So in the mobile era, where I have all my mail on my mobile device or available through whatever it may be, I don't have this data available today. And then the other aspect is shared PSTs, where the same problem where my personal mailbox was limited, I also had a shared mailbox that was limited. So these shared PSTs existed, and that really adds to corruption and confusion on who they belong to, and
Hmm.
really causes a lot of problems.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Oh, there's so many problems, Mike. I hope you're going to help us out.
I think so. So we've got four strategies that we see in this space, and the first is upgrade.
Hmm.
So just what we're advocating for today is, unless if that data is disposable, you don't need it, it's too old, or whatever it may be, or you're an industry that doesn't need it, then you should upgrade them to Exchange Online or Exchange On-Prem, whatever your organization is running.
Mm.
or an archive. If you are using an archive system, that's another option as well. But you've got to be careful that you're doing it in a manner that doesn't impact your users. You're removing duplicate and unneeded data so that you're not causing an e-discovery challenge or other challenges with all the duplication. And then what you also have to handle is what we call leaver data, and that's people that are no longer work for your organization. So you're going to find a lot of those in the project, and you have to have a plan for that as well.
Mm.
The other aspect that some organizations have done is moving them. So this is again going to an archive system or just moving it quite simply into centralized storage so you can at least get at them. The challenge that you have with this is Microsoft doesn't technically support opening files remotely. They're supposed to be on local storage. And in the name of virtualization, so if you have a VDI environment that your users are coming in and using, like a Citrix NApp or Microsoft FV environment, then you have a challenge where users have no choice. They have to, because these files just can't, move to their temporary workstation all the time. So this can be a challenge where it technically works, but you are out of support and you will have larger corruption and other issues. But it certainly is a cheaper way to handle it, and it keeps the users using the same behavior.
It sort of, yeah, it doesn't solve any of those central problems that we were talking about, but it keeps the show on the road for the time being. Yeah.
It can solve some of the discovery if in
Mm.
certain industries, but it doesn't speed it up completely, but it gets rid of some of that. But you can never be truly sure that you have it all without doing a proper remediation effort.
Mm. Okay. I like option three here.
Option three can be nice. And for some people that are here, that may be the right option for your company. So if you are a organization that doesn't have a lot of regulation, if most of your data is sitting in a customer management system, CRM system, or workforce management system, or whatever it may be, the claim management system, and that data really doesn't have sensitive data in it, then this may be the right option for you. But for a lot of organizations, they find they end up in the do nothing because the project's just very difficult or they can't get the funding.
Mm.
And that obviously just has you kicking the can down the road until you're eventually going to have to do it, or you have a data exposure, or you had a failed e-discovery attempt and your attorneys were in court missing data, whatever it may be. But this approach, you quickly go from do nothing to upgrade, in some cases overnight. And we certainly have had to get involved in some emergency projects from that.
Everything that you think you're saving by doing nothing, that can all evaporate with one e-discovery request, with one corruption, with something, it only takes one event, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And in the end, we're going to talk about what you can do today. And one of it is get funding for a proper project. And one of the places to go is to get buy-in from your legal and compliance organizations because of the I hate to say, like, opportunity risk of one of these items coming in. It will
Yeah.
completely pay for the project and more. Plus, you get all the advantages of having it centralized in the process.
Option four here looks a bit risky.
So again, for some organizations, this can be right. If you have a document retention policy that doesn't allow email for, except for users on legal hold, and you have a small footprint of that, or maybe you have no one that has to retain data, simply deleting them isn't a bad option. Again, if you don't need the data and the users don't use it in their day-to-day life. This can be popular if you turned off PSTs at one point and just kind of tried to drain them out, and now the time has come to actually get rid of this data. And through reporting and analysis, you don't see a lot of use. So that's where organizations, in some cases will turn them off, and then over, in 5 years, we're going to delete them. Our document retention policy is 3 years, so that gives us some bonus years and do there. So a lot of organizations have done that in the last few years, but now they're hitting that point where they want to hit delete, and they're finding they have more regulation than they thought they had. There's more sensitive data in these than they thought, and they're kind of being forced to upgrade them down the road as well.
You mentioned this phrase a couple of times now. How do you turn off PSTs?
So the simplest way to turn them off is through a group policy. So if you have controlled devices, which most organizations do, and this could be a Mac policy or a PC policy, depending on your management platform, you can simply turn on registry keys in Windows or do a policy using your management program for Mac to prevent users from adding to these files or opening them all together. So there are ways to push this down and start your project that way, which we'll talk about too at the end on ways to jumpstart a initiative like this.
Great, thanks.
All right, and then so at the end of the day, when we talk about challenges, and certainly when we talk about really the change in technology that's really rapidly happened in the 6 months with our new working conditions due to the COVID pandemic, modern technology doesn't support PST files. You know, we have all of these Azure information protection options, all these limits on keeping data inside Office 365, having it all centralized and doing compliance scoring and e-discovery and all these other aspects. All that relies on the data being in Office 365 and Exchange. If it's out in PST files, you don't have the view of it and you don't have the control. And that means that you can't fully control this data. And even though that data is 10 years old, it's still, and for a lot of organizations, in scope for certain case requirements. It has potential, social security numbers and other national IDs and other information in it. And they're just not compatible with the mobile workforces that we have today, regardless of what working life is going to be like for office employees that are currently at home and maybe going back to the work. We likely are going to have a new age of people not fully in the office all the time, and this data has to be mobile so that when they're on a virtual machine they have it. If they're on office.com, they have access to it. If they're in regular Outlook, they have access to it, as well as the other tools that go with it.
We have a particular set of challenges today, don't we, because of COVID-19 and what's going on with those, and that produces an urgency on this.
Absolutely, and we've seen a lot of uptick in people undertaking these projects because of that, because they did nothing because they could, and this has been the event that's pushed it over the edge.
Okay, so free. Now that's it. Yeah, I knew there's, when this subject came up, I was thinking, I thought this was something that people just downloaded a little bit of software and did it for free, and how complicated could it be? There are free tools.
There are. So Microsoft, probably about a year ago, maybe a little more, did try to put out an offering for this. And for small organizations, it is a good tool. We actually have a guide on our website on how to use it. And for certain situations, it can be a good piece. And this is a situation where you collect your files, put it in, and this is if you're running Office 365, and use this import service that they have. There are some charge to it, and in some cases, you can physically ship your hard drives up. And this can be a good solution if the files are locked and aren't in use, or like I said, a small amount. This can be a really good option for some people. But for organizations of size or complexity, there's a lot of items that this doesn't handle. And in the next slide, I can talk to you about where paid tools come in and can provide additional value, including obviously the solution that we offer today.
But before you do that, I'm going to ask you, when you're talking about size and complexity, how much size and how much complexity?
So I draw the line at 500. So if you have more than 500 users, that's where I think you get the clear benefit. And then somewhere in the 250 to 500 range, that's where it really is a difficult size, because you're big enough to have a problem, but maybe not big enough to get the payoff of using a full solution. So, and for organizations of that size, it really is quite difficult to remediate that. But if you're under 500, or I'm sorry, under 250, you're clearly in the range where you should use the free tools, except in very specific regulated environments where, to the point that was made earlier, you need certain logging or documentation on remediating the problem.
I was going to say there will always be some outliers on this, won't there, who have a particular risk or a particular regulatory need to be able to do this, and then using any sort of haphazard method or hoping for the best is really a false economy, not just for the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the changes in regulation and having to defend your decision in some of these cases for e-discovery, it really can be difficult to make that decision on, oh, we went with, an inferior option to save money, but in
Mm.
the end you got the outcome that, the courts are upset about. So it's easier to make the other argument on, we really did the best we could, we put we invested in the solution, and if something, A, shouldn't have gone wrong, but if something went wrong, then you really can prove that in good faith you really did do your best, instead of, well, we saved, $20,000 by doing it this way, and then you get a fine for $500,000. So you just have to be really careful.
Yeah. Now, paid tools. You do one of these, but there are others as well, aren't there?
There are, certainly and really when you're looking at the market, you can actually use some of this as a checklist for what you should look at. We, pride ourselves in being the most complete solution, but certainly you're right, there are some others out there as well. But when we talk about the advantages of paid tools, this is where you don't know where all your files are. So
Mm.
the paid tools really have an advantage of being able to go out, locate where all the files are, whether they're on desktops, whether they're on network locations, and finding who they belong to, which is really a problem because most of them are called archive.pst, not, tim.archive.pst or whatever it may be. So identifying who they belong to is really quite a challenge, particularly with 20 years plus of this mess. So it's hard to identify. The other aspect is planning. You can't just do this all at once. You need to, you want the project to complete as quickly as possible, but you also want to do it in a controlled manner, and the paid tools give you the reporting and information to help you make those decisions. We mentioned too, if you've got more than 500 users, that's certainly where I draw the line, and I think a lot of people in industry would agree with that. The other challenge is controlling bandwidth. So the free tools, you have to collect the files and upgrade them and move them. And that can be a really
Ooh.
large challenge with network disconnects and certain restrictions and the bandwidth that you have in either a site or in the home working environments, and also handling network disconnects.
These are very large files, aren't they, very often?
They really can be, and it's not uncommon for users to have 20, 30 gig files, which on remote connections is a sizable amount of data, and the likelihood that something's going to get interrupted is
Mm.
quite high, just from normal uploads. So ensuring you have a solution that can handle that so that then you don't fight to get a 50, 100 gig file uploaded for, for weeks to months. Instead, it just, can progress and get the user through the migration.
Hmm.
The other aspect is we talked about PST files with passwords and corruption. You need a solution that can automatically handle that. For smaller amounts, you can manually run the free tools that as you find it, or you upload it to network service, find it, can't process it, bring it back, correct it, put it back up. You can do that on a smaller scale, but in mass, you really can't. You need to just be automated and handled. Some organizations want to filter and do really advanced filters on import, whether it's by date range or whatever it may be. There's some very basic filters in the network import service, but if you have particular needs or dedupe or things that need to be done, you want to be sure that that's, again, part of the paid tool process that we have. And the other aspect is you have a deadline. The paid tools, because of the ability to scan and see everything, it can remediate things and plan it a lot faster than a whole lot of the manual work that goes into the free tools to get them to work. Sometimes these free tools just don't pay off on the savings that you get, particularly where there's some expense in them anyway, based on what's available.
When we're talking about deadlines here, this strikes me as the sort of project that doesn't get done in a weekend.
Absolutely not. It's certainly, for organizations with 30, 40, 100,000 users, it can be a year or more. For organizations
Whoa.
under 10,000, you can get it done in 90 days to 6 months, depending on how much is there and how complex. If you're a worldwide organization, then
Mm.
you have a lot of internal processes, right? Because you may have to do training and communications in different languages and plan things and off of busy seasons to do things correctly. And the other aspect with paid tools is, particularly with our solution, is we migrate the files while they're open and read only. So the users can keep using the files while they're being migrated instead of having, a loss of access to them for 3, 4 weeks, which with the free tools isn't uncommon because you have to collect them all and then migrate them.
Ah, I see. And of course, that is extremely important because We're thinking about these PST files almost as if they're just lying around somewhere, but of course they're being used.
Absolutely, particularly for people that do contract renewals and things like that, they may not touch those files except every year or every 3 years or 5 years. So someone may be in a really critical business function and suddenly need that file in the middle of the migration,
Hmm.
and you really can hold up the business if they don't have that available.
Absolutely. Well, take us through the workflow then, Mike.
So when we're doing a migration project, these are the 5 steps that we follow, and we've been doing this for quite some time. So this has been honed over the years and is quite successful. So the first phase, just like any migration project, is planning, and that really comes out of the discovery phase. And that's where we scan all the workstations, scan all the network shares, find the files, find who they belong to, so that we actually have the ability to understand how big the problem is, who they belong to, find problematic business processes, and actually make a plan to remediate this. At the end of that phase, we know where all the files are, who they belong to, and then you can make an enablement plan so that you can, you want to keep the hopper full as much as you can, but you don't want to make a bottleneck by enabling too many users at once either. So understanding your network restraints. So if you've got a lot of files in a low bandwidth site, then you may spread that out over the longer period of the project. Whereas if you're in your main site, you may do as many users as possible, and that system can handle it.
When you're thinking about the order to do this in, are there any rules about that? For example, would you say do the PST files from people who've left the organization first or something like that?
So a lot of times in get things running, I will do that. So my recommendation is to start with the terminated users, because it allows you to buy time to deploy software and get user communications and get through your pilots. But you can still have some easy wins on, those files that aren't in use, being able to centralize those and get those done. The other aspect is you want to run as far and wide as possible. So you want to do users not site by site, but instead you want to stripe across your site so that you're making the
Ah,
best use of the bandwidth that's available.
I see. And at this phase, I imagine you turn up quite a few duplicate files. Can you, to be safe now, do you have to migrate everything that you turn up?
No, and that's what's good about the solution that we have is we'll discover files that are either likely duplicate because they're truly identical in the metadata that we have, or we can also identify if they're backup copies, and so we can actually dedupe them and ensure that you're only migrating into the final mailbox a single copy of each item, and you're not just blindly uploading 10 copies of the same PST and causing other issues.
Okay. Now, what do you do? What does centralize mean?
So in the centralization process, we migrate the files to a server for processing. There are some solutions that try to run it on the user's machine, but that can cause a lot of problems where it
Mm,
spikes processing and it can actually take them out of commission to be able to work while that process is being done. And it doesn't handle some of the efficiencies that we can do in the bandwidth upload. So that's where using our process, we can do bandwidth limitations, we can handle network disconnects, and we can handle a lot of those aspects and control it.
mm.
It then allows us to process the files a lot faster on the server.
So that centralization, I imagine at the moment, that's at least worst as well for people who have basically taken their PSTs home with them.
Yep, absolutely. So that allows us to take them from network shares, take them from their workstations, removable media through their workstation, whatever it may be, and then they all meet on the server for processing so that we can dedupe them properly. And we can also centralize, do a backup for the project or backup for whatever purpose the organization may want. But again, getting that full control so that the process can be remediated properly instead of just throwing it all into Exchange, and for users that can be a negative process as well.
Mm. What happens in processing?
So during processing, that's when we clean these files up. So we're going to do the dedupe like we talked about, remove passwords, clear up corruption, and do all sorts of options based on what the organization wants to prepare them for ingestion. So that way, when we hit the next phase, the files are as clean as possible, as efficient as possible so that we can migrate and remediate as quickly as possible. And so for organizations, when we're talking about the differences between paid tools and free tools, that centralized and process phase is really where that power is and automation is, and that can be a really time-consuming process when doing these manually.
I was going to say, how long does this take? I imagine automation is essential at this point.
It is. So instead of, trying to manually do all this one by one, we have users that, when they're enabled are done in the same day or less. For users with a lot of data, it can take, a day or two, but again, it'll automatically kick off where it left off. But
Hmm.
it's all unattended. It just works naturally. And we've got communication templates to guide users through. And keep in mind, because of our process, users kept read-only access to the data, the urgency isn't there that it needs to be done within an hour. That can give them a couple days to work through the upgrade process. And again, we call these upgrade projects because people conceptually understand them as an upgrade. They know in an upgrade, they may have some disruption, but it's not a elimination project, which is an emotional response where you're taking something away from me.
Yeah. Is it possible to do this without telling people you're doing it?
So we always advise on communications, and we've really worked over the years to get a good communication system together. And we do have a process where the user can get a pop-up and they can determine what data to migrate or not. But over 90% of our data or of our projects run automated, and we call them silent projects, where we'll enable the user, and then in the background, this will just kick off and without their interaction. And those have a really high success rate as well, because through the automation that we've been developed over the years, we actually can answer who these files belong to. Are they backup copies? Do they need to be migrated? We actually have a higher success rate with our algorithm than the user, where this is a confusing process for them.
Mm. Okay. Now, the migration process is basically just hitting a button at this point, isn't it?
So it's all automated, but in the migration process, we have a process that we've developed over the years to efficiently ingest data into Exchange, and whether it's Exchange Online or Exchange on-prem. We use it in our archive product, we use it in our tenant-to-tenant migration product, and it allows us to migrate data very, very quickly. And so we can actually import faster than pretty much any option available. And that allows us, a record PST project is doing over 5 terabytes of PSTs a day for some very large organizations. And so when done correctly, this can really shave time off of projects as well. The other thing I should note in this phase as well is during the centralization, that server can be in Azure. So we've actually been seeing a lot of that design with the current working situation, where we can see an Azure solution being a good option for organizations as well.
When you migrate PST files into non-active accounts, question in, what does that have a license cost?
So it can. So Microsoft doesn't bill for inactive accounts today.
Hmm.
And there was a famous threat about 2 years ago at Ignite. That was all the talk, and those of us in the exchange world, where they're going to start charging for them. And by the end of Ignite, it had been taken back. For now, there's not a charge for that. The account does have to be activated in
Hmm.
order to migrate. So depending on your process, you may have to reactivate it, hash a password, and then put it back into an active state. So you do have to do it carefully, but usually you can do it with a rolling bank of licenses. And because Microsoft does allow inactive accounts, it is, for the vast majority of people, a fully supported process. And we actually have automated this process where we can license the object and then revoke the license and work through for inactive accounts only. You have to do it truly for terminated accounts to be in the right on your licensing agreement.
Yeah, because I would imagine that a large number of these projects would have far more inactive PSTs being migrated than active ones.
Absolutely. Depending on the organization, there can be equal or more,
Mm.
particularly where these have been around for so long. And that's part of the planning process in the discovery, is we'll identify those users and, do you want them? Should we just back these up somewhere for you? Or should we just delete them altogether? And so sometimes there's even a tie-in with HR, because somebody's got to pull HR records and tabulate it together so that the compliance team can give guidance on, okay, what should we do with all these terminated users?
Now you have a rubbish bin for the cleanup. Does that mean that we can start deleting stuff now?
We do. So once it's done, we'll in a automated fashion do a cleanup process, and you can customize this. So in most situations, we'll delete them off the workstation within a few hours of the data being available to the user. But in some cases, you can delay 7 days, 30 days, whatever it may be. But the most important aspect is that the Outlook profile gets cleaned up. So the user doesn't get a bombardment of error messages, and in modern Outlook versions, every time the user gets a calendar invite, if that PST is missing, they get bombarded for each PST entry they had in their
Mm.
profile. So, and that can have a very high help desk volume. So with our process, because it's all tied together in our agent, we know to remove them at just the right time. And we can also give them a pop-up that says, hey, it's done. Congratulations. Here's a reminder where the files are to, again, reduce help desk volumes.
I was going to say the help desk has to be on red alert during this process, surely.
It does, and for organizations that have tried to do manual works, we've been involved
Mm.
in organizations that have reported help desk volumes up around 80%, and
Oh.
then our goal is to get it well below 5%, and we're very successful with that. So when you're talking about free tools versus paid tools, that's one of the aspects is, productivity and impacts. But for a lot of organizations where help desk calls have been outsourced and you're getting billed by the call, you can quickly at $30 a call or 30 pounds a call or 30 euros a call, whatever your contract or location may be. This can be a pretty big problem on adding expense.
From the way that you work, are you increasingly doing this as a sort of managed service now, or do you advise organizations and they do it for themselves?
So we run this as a managed service because it's a project that you only have to do once. And organizations with everything going on right now tend to really like that because we can come in and get these projects done a lot faster and kind of give a framework on how they should be run, and project managers, and instead of having a large team of 5, 6 people to work with, you can get away with a lot less people involved, a primary and a backup, and a good project and communications team. So we've been seeing a lot of use of our managed service, and really as of late, it's pretty much exclusively our managed service where we come in and operate the project for you.
And after this, are users going to notice any kind of performance difference if for using their email?
So I wouldn't necessarily say performance, but productivity. So now they'll have their files everywhere they go. Everything just works, right? They get a new device, it's all in Exchange. They want to search their email, they can do it on their mobile device on the go. So it enables them to really use Office 365 and Exchange as it's designed, instead of trying to track down this database file, look it up if they can remember how to. There's a lot of stress going on with users, and all of us personally, we're all experiencing what's going on differently. This removes an aspect of it while at the same time protecting the organization and everything else. It really is a project that if you can't just get rid of them, it really is a project to undertake this year.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Doing all that search work was good enough for us in 1996, Mike. I don't see why people should have it easier today. But I take your, I do take your point. Okay, so let's wrap this up with. I imagine there are a whole bunch of people. I hope you've convinced a whole bunch of people to think, okay, we've got to move this up the agenda. So, what do they do?
So what you should do today is scope the problem and determine how big it is. We talked about it earlier on that slide with 4 options that you have. Determine what your options are, but you have to know how big your problem is. For me, the easiest way to determine this where there is limitation is looking at help desk tickets for issues. So understanding, then usually you can search for that problem pretty easily, understanding your help desk volume and trying to figure out the value of remediating the problem. How many people couldn't find their PST files, how many people had corruption or password issues, and things that came up here. You can do some network scans, obviously just looking for that PST file extension, and that can give you an idea at a basic level what you see. But then also trying to understand later, doing some polling of just random sampling of files, scanning for desktop computers can help as well. Once you have this information, now you can get buy-in from departments on fixing the issues. if you are the technical specialist, the exchange specialist, the Office 365 specialist, it's very hard to get buy-in alone on a technical side of, we just should do this project. Instead, you have to get buy-in from all different areas, compliance and legal and, all your different risk areas on understanding the risk of what's out there, or if you have an incident, trying to remediate it as fast as possible. If you're just trying to do this alone, it can be hard to get that budget, but getting a pulled budget from different areas can sometimes be a better way forward to remediate this risk for your organization. The other aspect, turning off PSTs for all new staff, that's kind of a today, go create a group policy that's scoped to an AD group and all new users end up in the AD group and be done,
There
lock
are
them out.
probably some people doing it even as we're speaking now. Yes.
Yeah, hopefully you are, obviously
Yeah.
test it, don't roll it out in production, without
Yeah.
testing it, but and then slowly through some of your other scanning and you can try to detect people that don't have them or are not using them and turn off their ability to use PSTs as well. You should roll that out slowly. Don't just turn on the policy for all users overnight, because you may find your reporting may not have been inclusive. So I always recommend turning it on for 500, 1,000 a day, and then monitoring your help desk just to be sure you're not locking people out of things that they need.
That's good advice, and I'm part of that is saying once you're getting rid of the problem, don't let it in again through the back door. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And then, so these are some resources that we have for after. So we have a really good guide, which includes actually how to use the free tools. So if you want to try out the free tools to see if they work for you, this is a really good guide written by one of our Microsoft MVPs that we work with. And then there's also some, guidance on some of the paid tool offerings that we have as well. And then there's some other resources up here as well, some other webinars that are available.
Now, Mike, we made quite a big thing of how difficult it is to do correctly, and even if even if you're careful about it, give us a bit of comfort. Does this work?
It does, and the productivity and the legal risk remediation is a huge payoff for users and organizations. It can be a little bit of a storming phase to get these started, but it certainly the payoff is very clear and very helpful for organizations and our end users to be able to work more efficiently.
And internally, you're doing it as a managed service, so I guess you just deal with one or two people internally. Is this something that demands a team, or can one person take care of it?
So it's usually you need buy-in and process. So compliance issues pop up here from time to time in projects. So usually you need some compliance buy-in or guidance on certain situations, like someone else's PST files are in someone's machine. How do you want to handle some situations like that? So usually it does take some buy-in from several areas, but the day-to-day running, once the project hits that run phase, and we're quite good about guiding through getting into that run phase, usually is a small team in your company with a nearly 24-hour team that we have here at Quadratech to keep the project running.
Great. Well, I better let you get back to it. I imagine you've got quite a lot on at the moment when it comes to PST files.
Absolutely. I
Uh,
appreciate being able to join today.
all right, no problem. Thank you very much to all the Reg audience for tuning in, and thanks for the questions. Adrian, I hope that your migration goes well for you. Please let us know if it does. Also, let us know if you want to hear more about this or any similar subjects. We do more of what you want at the register. But meanwhile, from all of us at the Reg, from Mike and from myself, goodbye.